tried my hand at startups. The dot-com bubble burst. I decided to start a company exactly when the bubble was bursting. So nobody told me, that was not a good idea. Wanted to work on a part of the tech stack where Facebook was relatively immature because I thought it would be interesting to, create something. So that way it was a good experience because I was one of the first engineers on the data team. Almost all the major taxi companies like Grab, Lyft, Ola, all three were our customers. So we had a lot of really high profile, like large internet businesses running on Qubole. I've stayed an engineer at heart. I think that's what I really enjoy sort of doing is building stuff. Maybe not as much coding. I think I'm not competitive with young programmers anymore. But certainly, love sort of thinking about product, about at least doing design, architecture, still do a lot of code reviews and things like that. Always wanted to build a company, and I think that was definitely been one of my core passions throughout my journey. We do have very good talent. We don't have the volume of talent that they have.
Right now, the academia and the companies, they're very separated. Like they don't talk to each other.
They don't talk.
I am a big believer that India is going to be this massive land of opportunities in the coming decade.
Right.
There is going to be a lot to build from India.
This philosophy that give luck a chance, like do something random with your life.
So you have to figure out that field where you can reach the 1 percentile. If the top 1 percentile, whatever size of the bucket, if you're in the 1 percentile, then you're doing fairly well in life.
Yeah. So you cannot compete with a human one-on-one. Right?
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that AI is not useful. You have to have the nuance.
Right.
That, am I competing with a human or am I enabling the human to do something that they just can't do themselves? Maybe the next generation software engineers should be more product and design oriented.
I mean, if you're very, very good with engineering fundamentals, they never go away. They were relevant back then, they're relevant even today.
Hey, hi. Welcome to yet another episode of SCALER Pod. And interestingly, we have two guests today, primarily though Joydeep, but also joining with him, we have Anshuman because I'm sure we will talk a lot of interesting things. So Joydeep is currently running ClearFeed. Thank you so much for
Sure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So we have, I think, chatted a lot over Twitter. So really great to, sit across here and talk about it. So I'll start with probably just would like to walk down your journey in tech so far, where it started and what all your experiences you have had.
Sure. Yeah. So happy to go over. I've been an engineer, sort of a classic sort of engineering upbringing for the people in my era. I went to college in IT Delhi. Studied computer science, and back in those days, everybody used to go to States for to get a higher education if they were interested in sort of the technical career. We didn't have direct sort of jobs in the US at that time, so that was the sort of the way that you would go there. And also, that was a very different era. So we are talking about 1996. So not as many opportunities available in India at that time. So I went and got a master's there, then did a bunch of different jobs, worked at Oracle, and then escaped that. I spent a few years at Network Appliance, which was a very good experience for me. It was a company I really looked up to at that time, learned a lot of things there. Tried my hand at startups. So when the dot-com bubble burst, I decided to start a company exactly when the bubble was bursting. So nobody told me, that was not a good idea. So, went through lots of twists and turns, spent a little bit of time in Yahoo, not much, but then ended up at Facebook, which was, I think, a good experience for me. So that was in 2007. The company was just taking off, right? It was, I think it hit 50 million users just after I joined. So I remember the 50 million user party. They used to have all these parties at like these key sort of doubling landmarks.
And back then, like consumer internet, there were really just a few companies who had 50 million users.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And MySpace was much bigger than Facebook. And of course, Yahoo was much bigger. So Facebook had this, I still remember there was a toga party at the 50 million. And they would do crazy stuff. But I was in the data team there. So I, wanted to work on a part of the tech stack where Facebook was relatively immature because I thought it would be interesting to, create something. So that way it was a good experience because I was one of the first engineers on the data team. Hadoop was just, being born at that time. So we installed Hadoop, and then myself and a few people that I worked with, we built Hive, which became a pretty famous project in that ecosystem. So that was a very good experience for me. I also did a few other things. I ended up working in like the credits, so I know a little bit about how payments work because I spent some time in credits. I also did a little bit of design work for the messenger stuff because they were re-architecting the backend for that. So a few different interesting projects. But then I always had the entrepreneurial bug. So once I spent a few years and had vested most of my stock. Of course, I think whatever I did not vest is like worth way more than whatever I have earned since then. But I ended up I started a company after leaving Facebook in 2011. So that was a company called Qubole, which was a big data analytics company in the cloud, a little bit ahead of its time. So we were one of the first of these infrastructure as a service in the cloud. I think before us only AWS was there. So that was a long and interesting journey. So I did that from about 2012 to 2020. So it was a good run. We raised a lot of money. We raised about $100 million. I was doing engineering work out of India mostly. So I decided to come back to India around the time the company started. Built an engineering team out of here, ran the center here. The team here was also about 200 people, and the worldwide team was about like 350 or so. So it was a mid-sized company. There was a lot of action, a lot of building, a lot of big clients. At one point, almost all the major taxi companies like Grab, Lyft, Ola, all three were our customers. Nice. So we had a lot of really high-profile, like large internet businesses running on Qubole. Then COVID happened, and company went through some ups and downs, and we exited. So 2020, I got off the Qubole treadmill and took a break. And now I'm doing a very small company. I'm still figuring things out called ClearFeed. So that's what I'm doing right now. But yeah, that's kind of been my life journey. I've been mostly throughout the journey. I've done obviously with time you do a lot of managerial stuff. But I've stayed an engineer at heart. I think that's what I really enjoy sort of doing is building stuff. Maybe not as much coding. I think I'm not competitive with young programmers anymore. But certainly, love sort of thinking about product, about at least doing design, architecture, still do a lot of code reviews and things like that. Yeah.
Nice. So I'll come around to how the idea for ClearFeed came and what all you're doing there. But before that, the reason I asked Anshuman also to be part of this, love to talk a bit about the Facebook days as well.
Yeah.
Probably, Anshuman, how did you end up at Facebook? What was that story?
I mean, fortunately, the time I was graduating, the recession was just getting over. And it was very easy to get H-1B visas those days. So,
contrasting story.
So I didn't have to go study in the US. I got directly recruited to Facebook from India. Primarily because I used to participate in this competitive programming competition called ICPC. So I was there in World Finals. There were a couple of Google recruiters and Facebook recruiters who had sneaked in. They were not invited. so they met me and they were like, you should apply. I was like, oh, sure. And I applied, and fortunately, there were group of three of us. All three of us got in, and we joined.
Right.
There's a very funny story as well. So the day I joined, the second day after that, there was a hackathon. So we used to do these hackathons on
right. Yeah.
And in hackathon, it wasn't just that you're building tech. You could build anything. You could probably build, let's say, a shelf or a pull-up bar, etc. as well.
Okay.
So there was this group of people who were drawing things. I came from India. The first thing you draw is swastik. And I drew the swastik, and everybody had that horror on their face. What have you drawn? Because Facebook is primarily a Jewish company, and
yes.
And I mean, people saw that and they felt it's the Nazi sign, and then I mean, a lot of people took me to a corner. They explained that to me. Then I came back. I painted it over with something else.
Quite a way to join a company.
Yeah, so this is a nice story.
Yeah. But you were talking about, I think, the messenger infra. I think you also worked on that. How was the experience doing that? Because I think today, DMs and messaging kind of like a commodity, and almost every app has. I mean, a payment app also has a way to do messaging these days, and it's fairly well understood how to set up these systems now because everybody has implemented to a degree. how was it implementing that back when I think Facebook was kind of pioneering this? I mean, not a lot of people had messaging across the globe at that scale, and probably both of your views on that.
Maybe you start and then maybe I'll add.
Yeah, I don't know what point you joined. I can tell you a little bit. So I think, so when I joined that project, all the messages used to get stored in MySQL databases.
Okay.
So, so there was a sort of imperative from Zuck to essentially build the next version of that. He wanted to, essentially replace email. Right? That was kind of a very vague sort of a thing that people should use these as a default.
Back then, if I remember correctly, you could email to Messenger also, right? You
Yeah,
had
yeah.
an @facebook.com and you could send an email and there was
Yeah,
compatibility
yeah. I
available,
think there was some compatibility, and you want. So yeah, I think that the thing was that at that time, these very, very large scale data storage systems. So unlike some of the other messaging systems, like Facebook has this policy of storing everything, right? Like, so you can go back 10 years to your Facebook posts and so on, right? It was not like Snapchat or a lot of the younger social media products, they just don't store everything, right?
Or they store on device. For example, WhatsApp would store it on your device. It wouldn't store on,
Right.
on a
So
central
Facebook's
system.
model is different, which makes it a little bit harder. Now, is that the right model? Are you really optimizing for the right thing? I can't comment on those things, but like that made it a difficult problem because you have to store everything forever. Plus, you still want it to be lightning fast because it's a messenger. It's not like email and so on. So we had the mandate to. There was obviously a product and a front end angle, but like I was more on the back end side. Was like make a more generic sort of a scalable backend storage so that we could store everything at a much more faster speed. And like MySQL wasn't really designed to be a messaging store. And also like our
question in the middle. So you're saying that when it was already at like few tens of millions of users. And it was MySQL powering that.
Yeah. So this was the migration happened in 2010, I think. Roughly speaking, we started designing.
Right.
See, the attachment store was different already. There was a system called Haystack, which I'm sure evolved. So it was not that very big objects were stored, but like still
media
all the
separate
but
the text messages they are going.
Yeah, they were all going there. Yeah, and it's also a lot of strain on the MySQL backend, because it's like it does everything. So now I don't know what's the story these days, but back then it was storing everything. So then if you can take out a neat, clean part of it and put it somewhere else and sort of make it scale independently, there's some benefit of that as well. So I think my memory is a little bit fuzzy, I think, let me be honest. So I did a little bit of evaluation, Cassandra, HBase, did a lot of prototyping, played around with some of these systems, and left it at we kind of just took some architectural decisions and then I moved on to another project. So my role was mostly around prototyping and sort of doing POCs and evaluating some of these backends. And I think there was a much bigger team. I think Anshuman.
Yeah, I joined when you must have moved away because that was the time we had just taken a call that HBase is basically what we're going ahead with.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then because later on by the way, the scale of messages reached to a place where we would get like 30 billion odd messages a day. The storage we had, this is by 2012. This is within 2 years. The total amount of storage of messages that we had, that was roughly 30, 40 petabyte. At
Facebook
that
was
time,
running on its own cloud, right?
And this was in our own data centers. Yeah. So 30, 40 petabytes was the kind of scale where there was a team that was responsible for infrastructure optimization. They were after us that reduce your machines, reduce your storage because you are the biggest cost factor for us for storing all of these messages. So that was the scale of messages back then. I came into a point where we were just transitioning that you had this old messages which was on MySQL as you were saying.
Right, yeah.
And there was this project to basically just merge chat and messages. It was called Project Titan, and it was slowly being rolled out. So it was probably rolled out to a few users by then, and now there was this entire effort to firstly migrate all of these messages to this new system, and then scale the chat and messages. Like in those days, if you send a chat, the chat wasn't stored. Right. So hence, in a way, the prior to messages, like the infrastructure was simpler,
right?
Because it wasn't stored. So we actually built out the system where you would have these huge HBase clusters. So because you couldn't store everything in one single HBase cluster, so we built out these cells.
Okay.
So you had like 20 to 30 different cells. Every cell had like this huge HBase cluster and a caching layer on top of it.
So
which was also the
sharded on conversation IDs kind of a thing.
No, it was sharded based on user ID. So it was because it originated as a replacement for email.
Email, yeah. It's more like a inbox
You
kind
and
of.
me have a chat that could be on one of the clusters, and he has a chat that could be on a different cluster.
No. So you have your own version of Mailbox.
Okay.
I have my own version of Mailbox.
Got it.
If you send a message to me, there is a copy of that message that lives on your Mailbox.
the
and there's
Email
copy
kind of
that-
system.
The receive and send copies kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and by the way, like
So that's why you can delete your side and the other person still has
still
that.
has it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Also very complicated because because in a way, messaging systems are supposed to be highly consistent. If you have multiple copies and that are sitting in two different machines, keeping them tightly consistent is not a trivial problem.
Yeah.
And in case of like a group message, it would mean a full copy out,
Yeah,
right?
and so that's the other thing, right? Like Messenger was not optimized for group messages.
Yeah, I mean, this system does not sound like meant to be handling group
So
messages.
the way it was handled was exactly like emails. So if you were not on a one-on-one conversation, if you were on a one-is-to-many conversation, typically the message would get added to the sender's mailbox, and then a job was scheduled through MTA. MTA is basically the email proxy, email retry engine as well, which would sort of think of it like a queue.
Right.
So that would schedule jobs to add that message to all of the other recipients.
So it's basically similar to doing reply all on a CC'd mail kind of thing, right?
And then you have retries. If let's say it fails, there's a exponential back off. So it is possible you're on a group message. Everybody has that message, and you get your message maybe an hour later because there was some problem with your machine or with your database.
Yeah, and I think it is to show stats also, like it has been sent and then received by all.
Yeah.
Like synchronize back that. Yeah.
All of that was added later.
Yeah.
but yeah, that's where we started. And I mean, one of the components which I started working on was like, yes, there was this edge-based layer, but then like because the write traffic was so heavy, actually finding a store, even edge-based, right? Like edge-based is very good if you're just sending it writes. The moment you start doing reads and writes in parallel, because it's a log append, if you start doing reads also in parallel, then the performance gets affected.
Right.
So hence there had to be this massive caching layer which would absorb most of the read traffic.
Got it.
And it had to be consistent as well. So we actually built out this application layer which was caching the messages, was tightly coupled to a user. So if this machine were to restart again, the user would have slight amount of downtime just to account for the consistency. But I was working on this layer, this application layer, and then the layer above. And the complicated thing with Messenger was that we built it out because the context was we were competing with emails.
Right.
1.5 years in, the story changed, and we started competing with mobile messengers, WhatsApp, right? And then while the change happened there on Messenger, we actually acquired a company called Beluga, and we started building out the Messenger part. The backend couldn't be overhauled overnight, where you say that now I'll change the data store, I'll change everything else, because you had already massive petabytes of data. So we had to keep applying patches and patches and patches on top of it to make it optimized for.
I think some of that change also reflected on the client to a degree, like from Facebook messages to Messenger kind of thing. Like on the client also, like people were pushed to migrate to the Messenger rather than remain on Facebook.
That probably was after you. That was fairly recent, right? So
no, actually I was there when. So the thing is, we were competing with WhatsApp back then.
right.
Every 3 months we'd be given target. Hey, WhatsApp is doing this. You have to bridge that gap, right? And
so was when WhatsApp was acquisition was announced, was that a big shock?
Not really. I mean, we had almost known that there are certain infrastructural challenges because of which we can't compete with WhatsApp.
Yeah.
The kind of performance that they have, the kind of reliability that they have. So in a way, it was a big relief that yes, we're not losing that market anymore. Now we have two big players in the market, and in a way, we.
This is a huge market for Meta in general, I would say, because I mean that evolved into Instagram chats also, which like
actually,
Instagram DMs
there's
people do a lot.
There's a very
right?
interesting story about Messenger. I don't know whether it happened during your time or not. So earlier, there were basically within Facebook there were two factions. One faction believed that messaging was not meant for social media.
Okay.
It has to be a separate product. Like you had Google Chat back then.
Posts and feed are a different thing, and messages not.
Messages not to be merged with that.
Yeah.
In fact, however, what happened was that there was a hackathon project where somebody built out a very simple chat on Erlang and just rolled it out.
That was a long time back. That was a long time. That was the system that predated the the new version of the messenger.
Exactly.
Right?
exactly.
Language, yeah.
That built the thesis that actually it is an important component of social media as well, and that was the entire thesis which led to this entire project.
Right. And I think like now Meta runs the highest volume of messages per day exchanged across the world, across Facebook, WhatsApp, and
Sure,
Instagram. It's a
So at that scale, it's still not trivial, like once I mean, obviously the open source and everything has become like, will allow you to get maybe a free lunch up to a certain scale. Yeah. But I think when you work at that scale, and particularly the geographic spread also, things become
I do
very
remember one
challenging.
thing when you were talking about that whole inbox thing on HBoys. I remember group messages, I think, used to have a limit of 10,000 messages. So I remember, like, I think I had a group with some friends and suddenly sent a message and I did not realize that we had reached 10,000 and it said that, group messages have 10,000 limit, and it used to give an option to create a new group and it would just copy the recipients and create it. Like the client had that feature that, okay, you can make group V2 kind of thing.
No, I do remember that there was this cap of 200 people in a group. You couldn't have more than 200 people in a group conversation.
Okay.
Primarily because if you go beyond 200, in fact, like to be honest, like you go beyond 30 people, the performance of delivery of other
delivering all of the messages.
All of the messages was down the tank. We said, okay, fine, let's say 200 is this. So there's this interesting story. There was this, I don't know whether I'm supposed to say this, but there was this civil unrest going on in a country which I can't name right now. And they were using some of these channels as a way of communicating or coordinating things. And we started seeing this massive spike in number of groups with 200 participants being created. Because everybody would just create these small groups of 200 people, and that's where they would communicate these messages.
Okay. So coming on to, I think, when you moved on from Facebook to, and then started Qubole, I think I do have a bunch of questions around that, apart from the ESOPs part, which is what made you move back and what was the idea around why Qubole and why that particular problem statement of data analytics on the cloud?
Yeah. So moving back, I think was more of a personal decision driven by family mostly. I would certainly say maybe the initial charm of living in a foreign country had to some extent worn off. But I think I've already been there for 15, 16 years, a fairly long time. I had a young kid, and there was some family back here that I wanted to be closer with, and so on. So that was mostly a personal decision. It was a bit of a I was a little bit not sure whether it would work because I was starting a company also. Right. And then also moving back at the same time. And like they said, don't change multiple variables at the same time. So, I was a little bit worried that might, what would happen. But fortunately, it went okay. What happened was that it was much easier for us to hire in India, good engineers in India. The Bay Area market was already very, very hot at that time. It was very hard to get good engineers. So we were able to, maybe we were one of the earlier companies sort of in that mode, right, where there is the headquarters is obviously in the US, but a lot of core engineering work happens in India, and it's not like a 30-year-old company. It's like just actually Qubole had just started. So we were able to quickly ramp up here. It was not very conscious, it just happened. Like basically, my co-founder was trying to hire there, I was trying to hire here, and we were just able to ramp up and build a better bigger team here. Right. So this became our engineering base and so on. In terms of why I started Qubole, I had already been working for a number of years and always wanted to build a company, and I think that was definitely been one of my core passions throughout my journey. As I mentioned, I had tried doing that pretty disastrously much earlier on. And I had some lessons, I had learned up until that point. So one of the things that I learned from mentors and watching other people was that you need to ride some wave. When you build a new company, there has to be some driver. Right. So for example, when mobiles came, like obviously, tons and tons of companies got created because mobile was a huge change in sort of the user behavior, technology landscape, right? So across infrastructure, devices, software, you would have much value creation. So I had been working on the big data stuff. So like I said, I started the Apache Hive project at Facebook. I had a lot of familiarity there. And then basically what we saw, the two things that are big things, trends happening at that time was cloud And cloud was not being taken seriously at that time by the venture capitalists. But we felt very strongly as engineers. Is
it because it's not very tangibly understood?
No, actually what happened was at that time, while AWS was growing like crazy, AWS was not publishing their numbers. So there was a bit of an opaqueness that is this thing for real?
Right.
Second thing was that venture capitalists to some extent they always look at the past. So they are looking at, hey, what has worked in the past? And so they look at the big enterprises. The big enterprises were not using the cloud.
So on-prem setup.
Yeah, they had their on-prem setup, right? And there was this sort of a general feeling in the market that this is for developers. And today, the developer market is a big market. Like all the venture capitalists would sort of, if you have a developer play, they would love to write you a check. But it was quite the opposite way at that time. People used to think of developer plays as some riffraff. The real play was the enterprise play.
Right.
So there was this feeling that public cloud was really just a toyware for developers and was never going to become like real enterprise shit, right? So there was a skepticism regarding that. And even on big data, there was a lot of skepticism. So let me actually tell you a very interesting story. I tried multiple times. I mean, I did not try, but there were multiple points in the Facebook while I was at Facebook that we considered starting a company because I was very advantageously placed. I had started the Hive project. Everybody in the ecosystem knew me and so on. And we went to a venture capitalist and we were talking about, the market. And Cloudera had just spun off. Cloudera was started by one of the founders, and Cloudera was my ex-boss in Facebook. And so we were discussing. So he said, big data, like $150 million market. Like, what's the point? Of course, now you have Snowflake and Databricks that are both doing like, I don't know, like billions a quarter, right? So between these two things, right? Cloud for toys, as a toy for developers, big data is like some passing fad. It's like a $200 million market. There was a lot of skepticism, but for me, both of these were positive. Like I, as a programmer, as a developer, like I was like, this cloud thing is fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. In fact, one of the reasons I started the company was I tried to run Hive in the cloud, Hadoop and Hive, and I was like, this experience is so broken. I would love to go and fix it. You always scratch your own itch when you try to start a company. And what I was very, very excited was I felt that throughout my journey as an engineer, we had always designed systems for a fixed number of CPUs. So even when we were designing these distributed systems at Facebook, even a 1,000 node cluster, it was always 1,000 node. It was not like 500 nodes, in the first minute and then 1,500 in the second minute and back to 1,000 in the third minute. And I was like, this is a paradigm changing. Like there's the notion that your CPU is elastic. This is something different than just building yet another distributed system. Right. And I thought this could actually radically change the way people went about building like applications, but in particular the big data and the database ecosystem. So that was kind of my like, hey, this cloud is just, it's not just like take the machine and run it in the cloud. This is actually a transition from fixed footprint to elastic footprint. And that potentially allows us to build software in a very, very different way. And that was exciting as an engineer, that I wanted to go and build that thing, right? And then, and also like I had enough business knowledge by that time to understand that these technology shifts also create space to create big new companies. Right. So, you're not just doing a new thing, but if you can dominate that new thing and that new thing becomes very popular in the world, then you actually can capture a lot of the value and build something, interesting and large and make a big impact on the world. So those were, sort of the things that were driving me. And actually I was right on a lot of those things. That it obviously, if you look at the world today, public cloud is huge. Big data is huge. The companies that got big data and cloud right, they are huge. And of course, like every cloud company is huge. Like back, if you started a SaaS company back in 2011 or 2012, and you were able to grind it out and make it through, you were probably a really valuable company at this point, most of them.
Right, right. And, like even in cloud itself, what specifically about the problem statement of like data analytics on the cloud was that, was it just because that's a particular problem you're working with at Facebook and you thought of it?
Yeah, well, look, I was, I think to be honest, right, I had some business lens, but not a very, very, very strong one. I was definitely intrinsically motivated by technological challenges because my background was engineering. So yeah, some of it was simply that there was an interesting problem to be solved.
Right.
But I would say that there was actually something in the cloud that made big data very friendly to the cloud, and which was that data analytics workloads are very, very elastic in nature. They are very bursty.
Kind of things.
They're very bursty. Like morning 8 o'clock, analysts log in, they fire a bunch of queries, right? Then slowly the day declines. All the servers have to shut down in the night. So I think it turned out, but some of this is hindsight is 2020. That somehow it turned out that data analytics and data mining were ideally suited to take advantage of the elasticity of the cloud, as opposed to, for example, a lot of other applications just run throughout the day. They don't have as much elasticity, right? You don't go from scanning 0 bytes an hour to scanning like a petabyte per hour, right? That kind of elasticity is very rare in a regular application. You have some ups and downs, but you don't have that kind of a massive elasticity. The other way of looking at it was both Ashish, who was my co-founder, and myself, we had worked in Oracle for some time, and we had a very simple thesis that if Oracle could create a big database company out of essentially the microcomputer transition from mainframes to microcomputers, maybe we could create a big database company from the microcomputer to the cloud. So we were kind of, actually, you should be careful of applying past templates, but at least for me personally, that was like, I was definitely thinking along those lines. That could we create a new generation Oracle for the cloud. We would start with the data warehousing space, but if we did well, then we could do more things, right? And data warehousing is a big market. It's a non-trivial market.
Right. I'm gonna
if you can, I have one question.
Sure.
Look, the thesis that you have is, to be honest, very solid, and solid even today. The data usage, etc., is only increasing. People want to do more and more with data. And Qubole actually became a very large company to a point, right? Maybe just for my own curiosity, what went wrong, and what are the learnings maybe from that phase of Qubole?
It's a very difficult question. So I think, like I said, I think we got the thesis amazingly correct. I think at this point, both Snowflake and Databricks want to be the next Oracle, right? And how are they building it? They are building it based on the cloud. There were some things we did not know. So I think if I were to divide up our challenges into different segments, I think there were some things we did not know. So I think one, I missed out on narrating here was that because we had come from the open source world, we also saw that I felt that it was, and we saw Cloudera trying to build an open source company. We were not very impressed by that because it felt like Cloudera was a support business. So what we thought was, we will take open source and run it in the cloud, offer it as a service. Then we can add some proprietary innovation, and it feels like a product. It doesn't feel like a support model.
DIY kind of thing.
Yeah. So it doesn't feel like, you sign a contract that, somebody will be there for 24/7 if you hit a problem with Hadoop, right? I'm not analyzing your null pointer exceptions, right? I think that thesis did not pan out. And the reason was that what we did not understand was that open source, while it in some ways is giving away software and it commoditizes your business, but as a distribution vehicle, it is amazingly powerful. It is the most powerful distribution vehicle in software nowadays. That
I think today, like all SaaS, rides out the open source.
Developers in particular, developer plays.
Like that,
every developer plays go out as open source, right? And what happened was that actually ended up working against us, because the open source projects that we were trying to offer as a service in the cloud, the owners of those open source projects also started their own companies. Notably, Databricks owned Spark. We offered Spark as a service. We were ahead or at the same time in terms of timing, in terms of offering. Our offerings were better than theirs.
15, 16 was the era I remember, because I was graduating from college around that time. And that is when almost every VC fund, I was reading of some Paul Graham essays on how to do a startup, and look at what VCs are chasing, and then they're literally going out to every maintainer of open source project and just asking them to convert yourself into a company and we will fund it.
So I think this in 2011 and 12, the fact that open source, what exactly was the way to build a business around open source was not so clear. It had become clear after a few years, based on the rocketing success of
take the core maintainers, ask them to build a company, fund it.
It had become a formula by the time. Definitely by 2017-18, it had become a complete formula, right? And so we were caught on the wrong side of that realization in the market, I guess. I don't know what else to call it. And like I said, all these competitors got funded, and like then just being sort of honest here, right? So if I'm offering Spark as a service, but Databricks is running the Spark Summit, and Databricks is also offering Spark as a service, who do you think is gonna sort of win that battle, right? So they rapidly took over, right? Now Snowflake did not play that game, and maybe there are multiple sort of issues, right? So now because we were doing open source, we were also So I think maybe to summarize in a nutshell, we took on all the problems of open source. Like open source has problems. It's very fragmented. You have lots and lots of versions. There's a lot of maintenance burden. You have to keep upgrading, applying patches, and a bit of a chaos. There's a lot of noise. Now, it's worth it because if you have the GTM, sort of the distribution and the leads pouring in because of it. But if you're left with the maintenance burden, but don't have the positive aspect of the leads coming in, then you kind of kind of screwed. Snowflake went the other way. They had a very clean model. They said, nothing to do with all this open source nonsense. It's very complicated. It's very polluted. And they had this they understood, they coming from Oracle, Benoit and his team, they all came from Oracle. They understood the data warehousing market very well. They said, we're going to just build a purpose-built software for data warehouse in the cloud. Right? And that model was very different from ours. It was not cobbling together a bunch of open source things to make it look like data warehouse in the cloud. They took a decision to, from scratch, let's design it that way, right? So I think we were kind of stuck in between these two models, right? And of course, we were competing with AWS. By the way, we did fantastic there, right? So we competed for, our entire lifetime. We competed with AWS, happily did business, won against them. That was not an issue. And of course, we couldn't beat them all the time, but we got enough business to do really well.
Right.
But I think the split of the market between the open source driven companies and these sort of totally proprietary, and that model is very, very different. The Snowflake model is completely different. I think we kind of got somewhere in the middle. I would say that everything else, any company goes through lots of ups and downs, as I'm sure you have also experienced. We also had our strengths and weaknesses. I think those are all secondary. Because if your higher level sort of bits are aligned, then I think you can always fix those secondary weaknesses. But I think you cannot fix if your core model is flawed. Having said that, I would also point out that there have been other companies modeled after the Qubole model that have done well. So actually, there's a company called Ivan out of Europe. They just offer Kafka, MySQL, Postgres, a bunch of popular sort of infrastructure components as a service in the cloud. They are not AWS and they are not owners of the open source project, and they pulled it off. So they are a multi-billion company. So yes, even on that front, there are some learnings. Why were we not as successful as Ivan? Because it's too complicated. It's a very long story, but people have figured that out also. So anyway, so I think that was kind of some of the challenges. And I think what often happens is that, as people say, right, that sometimes the person or the company that starts first is not necessarily the winner in the market. So I think that was definitely true for us, because both Snowflake and Databricks launched after us, but they got the model right, and we just couldn't, right? And then we ended up competing with them. We competed with them for many years. We won our shares of bake-offs and POCs, but obviously it wasn't enough, right? At the end of the day, they had a very different outcome than we had.
Understood.
Yes, I will ask some questions about some differences in your probably first innings and your second innings, hiring people in ClearFeed and Qubole. But before I come to there, I do have a question which I would love to ask to both of you, which is, I was just telling a while back that, out of all the guests in the startup, I think on the podcast, I think there have been maybe half of them have had a past stint at Facebook or at Yahoo like you. So what makes these kind of orgs, and then also it's probably a point in time where maybe it's 2010 to 2015 era, and there are a lot of people who have come out of that time in Facebook, or maybe 25 to 2010 at Yahoo, and there are a lot of people who have come out of that time. And there are a lot of people who have gone out to build really great core infra companies, SaaS companies, all of these things. what's the magic that happens? Like, how do these mafias get created? What are each of your takes
Actually,
on that?
there's one interesting point there. Like, a lot of these companies are enterprise and infra heavy.
True.
So there's something definitely happening inside which is leading to that. Maybe I'll.
Why don't you go first?
Yeah, I mean, look, mine is not, SCALER is not a either enterprise company or an infra company, so maybe I'm not the best person to answer, but I'll still share my views. One is, I think larger companies, the kind of scale that you see,
Right.
Yeah.
and the kind of problems that you see, they are unparalleled. In a way, look, I mean, if I build a very small product, it is possible it has a bunch of flaws, but it still works because there are lesser people using it, lesser corner cases being explored. But the moment you expand it and you make it really large scale, all small flaws, they start to become these large thorns that they start to prick you.
Right.
And when you start to see all of these cases, then you know like what does a complete, let's say, solution look like.
Right.
And to be honest, like a lot of these enterprise companies that I have seen are essentially replicating what existed at Facebook.
Right.
And exposing it to the world. They were all proprietary within Facebook. So just building a version of it for the remaining companies that are out there and giving it as a service to them, that makes for a decent company, and that creates like a good enough success. That's been my viewpoint, but again,
I totally agree on that, right? I think I was gonna, like, if I had gone first, I would have said the exact same thing, that the large internet companies are always at the bleeding edge of the problems, and engineers inside end up solving those problems before the rest of the world sees it.
Right.
And I think that is at least half the story. That the biggest big table came out of Google, like, rest of the companies were like, what is big table? Of course, now everybody is using like some Cassandra or something, right? Everybody has some variant of that architecture, right? And so on, right? And we talked about the CDNs a lot, right? And so on. So I think that's one.
Kafka and Confluent, like the LinkedIn. LinkedIn stuff.
So the other things I would say, actually, the Kafka one example is a really good one. A lot of those companies also came out of open source projects, right? Now, what happened was doing open source at a big company is particularly it's a fantastic business model. And let me explain why. So first of all, you are solving these leading edge problems, right?
Yeah.
And all of the IP that you have developed, you have put it in open source. That means anybody can access it, right?
Even you can access it when you are out.
Even you're outside, right? And the biggest problem is basically where you go to a JP Morgan or a Morgan Stanley or a Wells Fargo or whatever, and you try to sell them a piece of software. What is the first question they will ask you?
Who else is using it?
Who else is using it, right? And so now, if you are the founder of Kafka or Confluent, and you say, oh, Kafka is being used in LinkedIn to serve whatever, like, billion users and so much traffic and this and that, you have your reference customer. And that's a huge problem for a startup, right? I mean, doing a second innings, I mean, I can tell you that is obviously one of your biggest problems, because it's a huge chicken and egg problem, right? You can't get a big customer until you're...
I see that a lot in the last 5 years is happened a lot in the front end business as well, with the React ecosystem. There have been a lot of ex-Facebook people who have built a bunch of things on top of React, and then they are companies. So there's a company called Expo. Which makes it like React native apps, right? So now obviously, like, setting it up on a local laptop, there's lots of corner cases, like you need Xcode, you need an Apple license, you need Android Studio, which will take 4 GB of your RAM to build and all of that. They're like, okay, like, build React native apps on the cloud. Like, built by ex-Facebook people, because they were doing it for React native in Facebook, and then the core infra is it's all open source, React native as a project. And nobody's gonna, it's one of those things, like, nobody's gonna fire you for using React native because...
Right. So you got a reference customer. There's another thing which is very subtle. Today, we are only discussing the companies that we have been somewhat successful. So we talked about a few companies like Rockset and like, obviously Confluent out of LinkedIn and Yugabyte. There were also a lot of projects at Facebook that may not have been that successful, right? Now, what happened was, in a traditional startup model, all of that risk that you would build something, try it out, 90% of the time it will fail, 10% of the time it will succeed, right? You de-risked all of that at your big company employment.
Yeah, I mean, it's not your risk.
Yeah, right. So Facebook paid for like, 100 projects, right? Out of which 10 got like really successful, maybe Hive and Presto, and a few others got really successful, Thrift earlier and so on. And those people could come out to the venture capital landscape. Venture capitalists love this. They're like, wow, this project is fully de-risked. Right? It has a large reference customer. Facebook paid for like most of its development effort. Now I got to like just hire all those maintainers out and build a business model around it.
Right.
This is a fantastic model. Like, what are the odds that it will completely fail? Of course, it could still maybe not be a huge outcome, but the odds of it completely failing are almost zero. Right. So and then of course, last point I want to add to what he said. We are talking about companies that did very well financially, and their employees also did very well financially. So that also helps, right? Because your employees have the wherewithal to come out, take a few years of sort of.
I mean, it does not necessarily happen out of, I would say, every company which fits that big company problems bill, because it's probably not as much of a Microsoft or Amazon mafia as much as probably like a Google or Facebook mafia does exist.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Yeah. PayPal most famously.
Yeah. And PayPal had like other fintech competitors at that time. It's not like out of every of those companies you had a similar thing happening.
Yeah. I think it's hard to comment on like why Amazon and Facebook, Microsoft don't have maybe as much, but certainly I think I would definitely say that if you look
that's
at,
definitely an ingredient for sure. I understand that.
Yeah, that is the financial independence, and then being able to raise money easily in that ecosystem. I think maybe Amazon, Microsoft being in Seattle, I don't know if the.
I know like what might have worked for Facebook. I have a thesis there.
Yeah.
I mean, in Facebook, to be honest, like the pace at which the Facebook scale was growing, the scale is to employee ratio was very skewed.
Yeah.
Still, for example, I remember when I joined, entire Facebook videos was handled by one person. There was this one person handling entirety of Facebook videos. So the kind of problems that you were exposed to firsthand, they were actually very nuanced, and
by the way, it's still a very early org structure, not a late org structure.
That guy was also an exceptional guy. So
I know. Yeah.
So I think that we didn't discuss this. I think we cannot say that the people at all of these companies are the same. Facebook is to hire exceptional people, and naturally, like that has some role to play in the
likelihood of their success.
And without that, you can't have one person handling videos entirely.
Yeah, exactly.
You hire exceptional talent. Makes sense. Coming to your Qubole journey again. So you're saying that it was easy to, let's say, come back to India and hire. How was the experience in building the team?
Yeah, I think
it was not pretty standard stuff you were doing, right? It's not like CRUD or stuff like that.
No,
right?
That's a
specific set of things you were doing.
Right, that's true. It's a great question. It's been a number of years. I don't know how much I can recap, but let me try.
Whenever you're done, I can share, by the way, the other side.
Other side, yeah.
Because we used to run a company called InterviewBit, and we used to help companies hire. Yeah. We also tried to help Qubole hire, and I'll tell you like the challenges that we faced then.
Sure. Awesome.
Yeah, I don't know. So I'll definitely say, I was also a noob, right? So as I mentioned to you, my inspiration going into Qubole, I was a typical technologist, right? So all my motivation was like, let me build some cool stuff and change the world, right? Kind of thing. So from there you come to a country that you have returning back after 15 years. You have never done any legal stuff. You've never filed taxes. You've never incorporated a company. You've done nothing, right? And then, so you're not just doing the engineering work, but you're also dealing with company building in something which is not a big deal for 99% of the people, but it's new for you, right? So I had, I would say, lot of learnings from doing those kind of things, right? So for example, I'll give you a simple example, right? So in the US, human manpower is very expensive, right? And you try to do everything yourself.
Right.
To the extent that Facebook has this very famous culture that you should be able to do everything, right? Like, the typical startup mentality. You might be a Kafka engineer or whatever, Hadoop engineer, but if you have a small interface, you should be able to write it yourself, right? That kind of.
Yeah.
So when you come from that setting, right, and you have been imbibed with that hero engineer kind of values, you're like, hey, I'm supposed to do everything, right? So you're trying to do the incorporation work yourself. You're trying to write some UI code also. You're trying to write some Hadoop code also. And you feel like you're doing the right thing, but it's actually absolutely the wrong thing. Because, so there's you talked about unlearning, right? So it's not just the US-India unlearning, but also big company or maybe Facebook company to a regular company kind of unlearning. In a startup, you have to specialize, right? Our Indian context is very different. You can hire people for dealing with the government, right? for simple things, right? And you don't realize those things because you spend such a long time in the valley that you're like, hey, I'm supposed to do all this myself, right? Like, why would I hire somebody, right? And then you realize, hey, it doesn't cost that much to hire. That's the way this economy works, right? So anyway, so I think there was a whole lot of unlearning and new learnings. Fortunately, actually, to sort of preempt maybe some of the things that Anshuman will talk about, like, we had a good brand name because we were doing, as you mentioned, not just a typical stuff. We were like, hey, how many big data, like, cutting edge companies are there in the world? And operating in India and that too in an early stage Silicon Valley company, and that made it much easier for us to hire. So I did a few clever things. I ran some ads on Facebook. Very few people know this. Of course, nowadays Facebook is not a viable I think it's no longer an interesting advertising system. But what I did was I took all the top 30 colleges at that time in India, and Facebook was popular at that time in that community, in that crowd. Not today. Today that is all Instagram.
Age cohort.
Now it is all Instagram. But that time everybody who was graduating or in college would be on Facebook. And
just yesterday, I think some company put out an Instagram ad for hiring. It was like a proper reel kind of fancy ad, and people posted about like what day and age has come that people are making reels for hiring. But
so I can't make a reel. I need to pick that up. I need to learn that.
Maybe for ClearFeed you have to change platforms.
Actually, I want to share one more story here. So, as Facebook employees, you would typically see a lot of ads where people would run ads with their resume and target everybody working at Facebook.
Oh my God.
So I'll maybe share
that probably does not work for a different reason, but
So anyway, so so again, a little bit of secret. Like, I think over the years I've realized I have some marketing genes, a little bit. Not zero. Like, unlike most engineers, I'm not zero at marketing. So I did a little bit of all this kind of ads. I went to the Flipkart. I remember they still have this They have an annual conference. And even today, a lot of people come and say, oh, I saw you like 10 years back at N/, because Flipkart was a big company and so on. Did some local events and so on. Plus, we were doing good work and very, very differentiated work. So a lot of people just came to us. They said, we want to work at a company like this. Fortunately, we had good funding also. So we were able to offer at least, competitive salaries. If not, like, I don't think we could ever outbid somebody like Google. So there is actually another interesting story. When I came back, my first hiring strategy was, everybody said, how will you hire? Oh, I said, you know what, I'm just going to go there, land in India, go to the Google office and poach a bunch of people, right? And, that strategy failed miserably. Because, to put it very mildly, everybody working in Google India, they were very well taken care of. Yeah. And they didn't want to work anywhere else. Like, they were like, I'm all set.
I think financially as well as non-financially.
I'm all set. Like, why would I? And I talked to so many people. And I kept butting my head. Very good people. I still am in touch with a whole bunch of those people that I had chased.
Like 2012, 13.
Yeah. So the people I had chased in 12, 13.
Literally the best employer in India.
I had breakfast, coffee, lunch, dinner, whatever with those people. I'm still in touch. I still chat with them on Facebook. But no, they will not join. They said, I'm very well settled. Then I realized, oh man, like, this formula is not going to work. Then I tried all these other hacks. But between that, I think overall, we were able to assemble a very good team. I would definitely say that one more thing that I credit a lot of our company building with, I had an outstanding recruiter in the company. That person actually came from CareerNet, which you have some link to.
Somebody, one of our early employees, very good friends with him.
So I think there is some connection between the two of us through Ganesha. So the guy was amazing. He kind of built a whole lot of our team. I still am also very good friends with him, and connect him to other companies who are looking to hire people and so on. So I think these things helped us build a very good team. I think to your point, you raised a very good point, that is India very well placed for hiring people of that skill set? The answer is complicated. It was not at that time. We were able to hire some of the good people and able to train them, because if you are really good and I'm working directly with them, they will learn, right? People learn, right? So we were able to do that. But is India the best place to build the back end of a Snowflake? To be honest, no. Okay. And the reason is that in the Western markets, in the European markets, American markets, you also have these fantastic universities churning out, people with advanced degrees. And while we do have very good talent, we don't have the volume of talent that they have.
The volume of talent with good CS fundamentals.
Yeah.
That's what
So yeah, because you're in Bay Area, so you have Berkeley, Stanford,
CMU.
Then you have CMU and MIT and Caltech, and you put that ecosystem together, right? And you look at how many really good masters, PhD, and even good bachelor students are coming out, right? Plus our own kids are, right? They are all going there, right? So if you're building, a strong database company, and you need people who understand database compilers, right? Who have spent time understanding that. Even if they've not done cutting edge research, but they understand how to write a database compiler from scratch, how database query optimization works, how SIMD instructions work at a very low level, and there are many things one can discuss, right? You need training for that.
Yeah, I think I get what you're saying. Just a recent anecdote was I was just reading this blog that Figma published on how they recently sharded their database, and they had scaled on a single Postgres cluster on the largest possible EC2 instance they were running for a long time, till 2020, and then they did that sharding. And this is a nice blog. It just recently came out if anybody wants to read that as well. And then they had to write a query layer engine themselves because the way they were splitting it, obviously it was good for the write parts, but for reading they needed some sort of a query engine on top of it, which is basically still PGSQL compatible, so that the clients can still query through it and all that. And then I just looked through the profile of the person who wrote that blog, like what kind of a person does stuff like this. They had done it single-handedly. Then I looked at, and she just before coming to Figma, she had sharded the file storage engine at Dropbox. And then I looked at her profile on LinkedIn. She's just 8 years of experience, and the Dropbox thing she did straight out of college. Got out of college, and the first thing she did was basically.
So there's a reason for that, right? For example, CMU's database course is actually
Pavlov.
sponsored by Snowflake, and it's built in collaboration with them. And to be honest, like in that course is there publicly available. You actually build a database yourself. You build all layers of a database yourself.
So while I don't think this was fundamental problem for the company, in the sense that if we were otherwise doing well, we could have always also hired anywhere in the world. But I have a story that I tell people. I actually don't tell people, but I keep it in my heart. I'll tell it here. There was a day, when we had some really awesome engineers at Qubole, and there were 3-4 of those engineers that I thought were better than me. I really respected them, and I was like, these. If I had anything to build, and I would go to them. Right? I knew they were better than me. Then one day, we were looking at a project that did, there was some project inside Databricks, and we were looking at who was building that project and what kind of people they were hiring. And I realized that Databricks had hundreds of people like those 3-4 people I had. Right? And what were their profiles? Their profiles were PhD dropouts from Stanford, PhDs from European universities, masters from European universities, so on and so forth, right? I think that day was the day I realized that, while it is a very obvious thing I'm saying, I don't think it is very, it's a very obvious truth. But I think there was a day that it really hit me, that I just realized that we just couldn't play that game. No way. While we had very good team, but that scale of intensity of tech talent hiring, and believe me, running a big company is a lot more than hiring like good people, right? So I think we talked about Yahoo. You can hire all the good people in the world, still end up in a mess, right? So even having said all of that, getting that kind of talent intensity, and if somebody was also executing with that talent intensity, I mean, these were not like lousy companies that were sort of fighting and like like doing shitty things with top tech talent. They were actually converting that top tech talent into really useful software, right? And I think at some point I realized that it was not a fair fight.
I think it was also, by the way, that kind of work, to be honest, like the kind of companies that were doing that kind of work were very limited. Like Qubole was, by the way, you're very right, like the quality of talent at Qubole was very high. There was a lot of pull for people to come and work there. I remember this one incident. Ganesh had come to me and shown me this profile of this gentleman called Rajat Jain. I think you still remember him. Right? And he said, look, ऐसा ही बंदा चाहिए. We need somebody like like Rajat Jain. And his background was that he had actually worked very deeply inside like systems like HBase.
Yeah.
And most talent that we have in India doesn't do that kind of work. Like you possibly go and build applications.
Right.
Or I mean, you wouldn't classify most of the work that we do here as cutting edge, at least at that time. Maybe that has started to happen.
And obviously not fresh grads out of university, obviously not.
Yeah.
I think in particular, we are missing those PhD programs. So because, in bachelors in US versus India, more or less, I think people learn the same thing. But if you spend 2-3 years, even if you drop out of a PhD, right, you are
database or compiler.
You are focusing on something. It could be something else. It could be AI. It could be neural nets. It could be whatever. Right? Pick your. It could be chip design.
Correct.
Right? Somewhere you are going a little bit deep, spending a few years of your life, and on public expense or whatever personal expense, you are kind of coming out as an expert.
Right.
I think we really miss that layer.
Right.
That is my take, at least.
No, I mean, I think the ways of solving it, even within bachelor's and master's program. I mean, I believe like seeing the quality of talent that we get here, because in a way, if you compare the bachelor's talent in US, they actually, from what they know in school, they have a bit of catching up to do before they get started with, let's say, where Indians are in their first year. Our STEM is actually more rigorous in schools before you start your first year. So there is a way of accelerating it. I think what right now the academia and the companies, they are very separated. Like they don't talk to each other.
They don't talk.
If you have them working together, then we could possibly work together to build this, right? For example, the Snowflake CMU thing is a good example.
And yes, it improved a lot, but I think still there is a gap. Plus, we do have immigration also, right? So let's say there is a great CS program in IISc and there is a great PhD program. But I don't know how many of them honestly stay on. And then, half of them will end up in Google, like we discussed. So we've got like multiple issues, right? So we don't have enough people. We have competing draws outside the country. And even inside the country, many of the people would prefer to just work for obviously some name brand employer.
Right.
So then, after you have countered all of these issues, if you are a young, hot startup in some deep tech area, what is the talent base that's available to you?
Flipping the question to the people in the pipeline, the people who are building out their careers right now, does it still stand to be a good advice to, in your early stage of your career, move out to, let's say, a US ecosystem permanently or temporarily? Because that's something a lot of people discuss. Like even I think a lot of people who come to SCALER's events and classrooms, and it's a very hot topic of discussion. So what's your take on that?
Maybe I can go first and then maybe you go.
Yeah, why don't you go?
I mean, the story has changed, by the way.
Right.
It has evolved over a period of time. Right? When I graduated in 2010, and like I graduated a lot later than you did. But even in 2009, 2010, a lot of the work that would happen in larger companies in India was not of very high quality. For example, one of the seniors I was very close to in college, he had joined Microsoft. And his work was primarily maintaining or solving bugs that were reported in Windows 98 Japanese version. And it was very boring, monotonous work. And like he would come, I would meet him like once every week, and like 1 hour in that meeting was just him cribbing how the work is so bad. And that was not just him, like that was the story all across.
Right.
That most of these offices did not get very high quality work. There were some projects that, for example, Google India was handling Google News back then, if I'm not wrong. Which might have had some interesting challenges, but those projects were very few.
Right.
So the narrative was that if you had to do high quality work, the only way to do that was you actually move to US, you learn, and then you come back.
Right.
Which made sense. However, in the last 14 years, to be honest, we've had now larger companies come out of India. For example, Flipkart competed directly with Amazon, and like Flipkart only had the India office.
Right.
All of the infrastructure that they built was built from this office.
Correct.
And people who were there as early employees, I'm sure they would have learned a lot in that journey.
Right.
For example, Qubole got built. I mean, your office was still here, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I'm sure like the 3-4 engineers that you're talking about, they now are very differentiated from.
Yeah, they are leaders in like other big famous companies. Yeah.
Correct. So I mean, the number of those opportunities which you would qualify as like that would make you do meaningful tech work or solve a meaningful problem, those are increasing in India with time. And to be honest, like there are a lot of problems in the Indian ecosystem which you can build from here.
Right.
As an entrepreneur, I can tell you my point of view. I mean, in a way, I feel there are lower risks to building from India because the cost of building from India is much, much lesser.
Right.
If I was building something similar in the US, I would probably be thinking half of my time thinking about my runway and then how do I survive, etc., etc. All of that is going to be on top of my mind. Here, at least, I have lower cost of building the same thing. So I still believe that. I am a big believer that India is going to be this massive land of opportunities in the coming decade.
Right.
There is going to be a lot to build from India. The narrative has changed in the last 14 years. However, look, I mean, there are people who prefer, let's say, the lifestyle that exists out of India, and that is a very personal choice.
That's a different question, of course.
So and for those reasons, if somebody wants to relocate, absolutely. If you find something that is extremely exciting in the US, absolutely go for it.
Right.
But then, I mean, you have competing opportunities in India as well, and you should look at the entire thing and then take the final call.
Yeah,
makes sense.
Yeah, I also get asked this question a lot, and honestly, I mean, I've written references for lots of young people who have taken up courses in the US and so on. To each his own. I think that's always been my sort of approach. I mean, whenever I end up having these counseling kind of sessions with sort of younger folks, I always try to understand what is it that they're looking for. First of all, I'm neither biased to India or the US. So one of the things I always encourage is, this philosophy that give luck a chance. Like do something random with your life. Like so, when people go to study to the US, I actually give a very strong thumbs up. That of course there are opportunity costs. You have to think through, whether it makes sense for you because you'll lose a few years of employment and there's a bunch of things that you have to think through. But in general, it's a good thing because you kind of randomize your life a little bit for a couple of years. Go somewhere else. And I know you travel a lot, so you probably are nodding your head very strongly, right? Just sort of like
just dunking yourself in an
uncomfortable situation, slightly uncomfortable. Like for example,
suddenly see that this way also things work here. And
that reminds me of an interesting tale. I'll just make a quick digression. I remember nowadays, people just pay their way through, so they don't really have to work when they are going to, let's say, a college in the US. But we had to work. When we went there, we had to do what's called a research assistant or a teaching assistant. And my first gig was a teaching assistant. And that thing that you are like 20 years old and you walk into a room full of white people mostly and a few black people and nobody that you're comfortable with. And that was the evening class. So most of these people were like 15 years older than me. I was just like supremely unsettling. You're worried about everything, your competence, your language, you're like, I don't know what the hell am I doing here. So I think, so I think that kind of randomization is actually like, I usually tell people that's a good thing, Other than that, I think a lot of the other things that Anshuman has said is actually true, right? It's like, what are you looking for, right? So if you're looking for building exciting companies, building a business, India is, I think, it's doing very well. And I think there are a lot of opportunities here. And a lot of the risks are not there. Exactly like he said, like here, you don't have to worry about health insurance, right? If you go without salary for a couple of years, and you don't have much money in the bank, you're fine, right? I mean, what does it cost to survive here? And but in the US, even a trip to like for an emergency at a hospital, like just to get like maybe you broke a bone or something, it'll cost you thousands of dollars. So you need a health insurance, and you can't get a health insurance unless you have a job. Otherwise, it costs you too much. I mean, there's like massive issues, massive, right? So I think if you are a risk taker, you're an entrepreneur, you want to invest yourself in a growing economy and build something, I think this place is fantastic, right? And I personally am not the best person to, because I have not built an Indian business. I think Anshuman has a much better idea on that, but I can sense that, right? On the other hand, look, if you are that deep tech person, maybe, right? And you want to get a PhD in compilers and like work with 20 other people who also are working in that, well, maybe then, the answer is different, right? Maybe those places continue to be the best places of choice. So I think it's very nuanced now. I think there is no carte blanche that, hey, I have to go to the US to make a success of myself. I think let's, discuss, what is it that you are looking for in life, right? And also, like, even from economic outcomes, as many people know, right? So while the initial salaries and stuff in India might be a little bit on the lower side compared to the West, but they also ramp up very quickly. So that means that, you know, if you do well, within a few years you can be doing very well. You know, your savings might actually be a pretty good fraction of like what they are in the US, because the expenses there are much higher. So
No, I know people, at least in my age group, where people say that, you know, they have moved back from US to India, and their monthly savings are more.
Yeah.
The salaries are less, but the savings are more.
Yeah. So I think
in absolute number, like after conversion, the savings are still higher.
Right. So I don't have the up-to-date numbers, but
yeah.
So it's a very nuanced discussion now, and there are other aspects like quality of life and so on.
Yeah, I think that nuance is the right word.
Yeah.
And the reason why this discussion is important is because, by the way, we do this masterclass where we talk about like what do companies outside look for.
Correct, yeah.
And there we end with the exact same thing that, hey, look, I mean, it is a very nuanced discussion. It's not a plain discussion that you have to go outside. The reason we also do this class is because we see there is this one layer that actually understands what they want to do in life, and hence are able to do this pros cons analysis and then figure out like what they want to do. There's actually, however, a very big layer of people who haven't thought about what they want to do in life. They are driven by what is the current popular narrative.
Yeah.
And the current popular narrative is that if you go and work outside of India, if you're not in India, then your status is higher, your everything is much better. And hence my life goal is
lagging indicator also, right? I mean,
yeah, sure.
Land is also lagging indicator of the reality, right?
Sure.
Yeah. I think actually we should, you know, maybe take a step back. You know, very early on in my life, I also had a bunch of confusion. I almost decided to do an MBA in India. I was like about to apply, and then I stepped back and I asked myself, look, what is it that I really would feel proud of? Like, what should I spend the rest of my life in? Do I really want to, like, I mean, it sounded interesting, but everybody was to do an MBA at that time. So,
oh, by the way, that's true even today. A lot of people want to
you know, then I said, you know, look, maybe it might pay a little bit more, don't know, but I really wanted to be a technologist. You know, that's always been sort of my inspiration in life.
Right.
And one day I just realized that. Much later, I discovered this Ikigai thing, which is exactly how I thought about things then. I actually, nowadays, if I have a counseling discussion, I always point people to the Ikigai thing. I say, look, you know, you got to think in terms of that framework. You know, what is it that you really are passionate about, that you can be the best in the world, and which hopefully, you know, makes you a decent amount of money at least, right? Like,
and the third circle, which I do tell people a lot, is that if the first two circles align, you will find some place to make money out of it, because a lot of people do ask, you know, a very simple question like, you know, I'm getting started off in software engineering. Should I focus on front ends or on back ends, or should I look towards data engineering or back end? I say that, see, like the top 1 percentile everywhere is getting paid crores of rupees, right? And you can become the top 1 percentile if you like it and you are good at it, right? And if you're competing with someone who can't sleep at night till 3 a.m. till they have figured out what's wrong, and you are the person who just wants to shut down their laptop because you don't really like doing it. You're not going to compete. It's just not a fair fight. And that person will reach the top 1 percentile, right? And so you have to figure out that field where you can reach the 1 percentile. If the top 1 percentile, whatever size of the bucket, if you're in the 1 percentile, then you're doing fairly well in life. Whatever it is.
Yeah. At least you're happy. I think that's another thing, you know, not everything is about money. You also have to be happy.
I mean, I'm saying that in addition to that, the money will also anyway make, because even for the smallest of buckets, like the specialists, the experts, they're still making money.
Happiness helps you compound your efforts. So the more effort you put, the more likelihood of being in the top 1 percentile, and hence everything else takes care of itself.
Makes sense. And I'll segue to what's written on your you know, t-shirt about ClearFeed. You have a AI domain, so it's a hot thing to talk about. So yeah, I mean, what about this, like another stint as a you know, entrepreneur? So how did this one happen? Like after you sort of wrap things.
Yeah, I think, you know, I think we're talking about nuance and career decisions, and we're like, you know, while, you know, I'm not at the early phase of my career, but I did go through a little bit of thinking over what do I want to do next. You know, I did a big long run as a startup, and honestly, that was a pretty stressful experience. You know, over a long run, the stress adds up. And I always used to think that maybe once I wrap this up, I'm done with this stuff. But then, you know, when I became free, there is a risk of sort of repeating, sort of doing the same things that you're comfortable with. But I just felt like, hey, I just love building products. I was like, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? If I become like a venture capitalist or something in that direction, finance, or do trading or whatever, it's not going to make me happy. It's the same whole that MBA versus tech discussion I had with my own self 20 years back. I was having that same discussion. I was like, yeah, I could do those things, but they're not going to make me happy. And what I had realized was that what really makes me happy was like sort of building things. So I said, okay, fine, let's just go and build again, and hopefully I still have enough tread in my tires to do that for a few more years, build something interesting. So I think that's where I started, and I had definitely transitioned from being this core technologist, infrastructure guy, trying to do really difficult things with computers and databases and all this stuff, to being very much more of a product person trying to solve my own problems. So I back at my when we were 200, 300 people odd at Qubole, it was difficult to manage a team of that size. I'll tell you another story. So while we were building these systems for dealing with petabytes of data, I always felt my life was completely bound to Slack, Jira, whatever, right? Yeah. 3-4 other systems. Okay. I was like, this is not that much amount of data. So, I'm spending all these complicated products to analyze petabytes of data, but there's so much value in these small amounts of data, right? One day at Qubole, I actually extracted I downloaded most of our Slack data using the APIs and stuff. 200 people company for, 5, 6, 7 years that we were on Slack. Not the attachments, but just the text data compressed was, I believe, only 70 megabytes. Right? So all of our life, all the things, everything we discussed, just 70 megabytes for 6, 7 years of data, right? So anyway, so I think I ended up gravitating towards this problem of, how can we make the workplace a little bit simpler? How can we help people sort of, deal with noise and all these tools, and figuring out what to pay attention to? It was a little bit of an abstract problem, honestly. It was not a very concrete problem. But I started building something. I just sort of got a small team and talked to some people, did some. So anyway, so I'll just to summarize, fast forward to where we are. So what we have ended up building is essentially a modern help desk for Slack. Okay. So we have all these, everybody is sort of slacking all the time, and a big part of that slacking is raising problems, right? Raising problems to DevOps team, hey, something is broken. Fair. Raising problem to support team, hey, what happened to that ticket? Or raising problem to the finance team, hey, where's the invoice for that customer, and so on, right? So that's a very common sort of a flow inside companies. It's a distillation of the general, recovery, of the noise problem. So we have got a very beautiful, software that's deeply embedded inside Slack that integrates with all of your other software, because you're not just Slacking. You're also I'll raise an issue and then I'll convert it into a Jira, and when the Jira finishes, I'll communicate the status back. Or hey, the customer is sitting on Slack, but the guy, the support person is sitting on Zendesk, so I got to bridge these two things. Then you have problems of enormous sort of information overload. Everybody's asking the same questions again. So we provide a help desk, but we also do deep integrations. Right. We also have AI to deflect questions. So we index your knowledge bases, your Slack chat rooms. In fact, we just sort of rolling it out. We can index your old Slack chat rooms and help you point out, hey, this discussion has already happened 10 times before, right? So maybe before you raise this question again, maybe you can. So I think that's kind of, what the product has morphed into its current sort of iteration. We mostly work with customer support teams, internal support teams, IT teams, sometimes engineering teams, and have a good number of customers now, mostly tech, a little bit tech companies, because Slack is very popular in the tech crowd.
It's an internal tool for the company's internal comms?
Yes, internal as well as external, because a lot of companies these days do Slack support.
So what they create a Slack server with all their clients on it.
Yeah, Slack Connect, they'll typically start these Slack Connect with their, of course, people also do that with Discord and, other chat forums, but we are more or less focusing on Slack right now. Yeah. So we both the use cases, we are tackling and helping all these companies. So it's been a good ride, it's in sort of a second, and I think it's, enjoying building the product side, not as much, I would say, deep tech, and the AI stuff is really interesting, but definitely not as deep as we would go in the Qubole era,
So I think the question in that would be, particularly in today's times when all of these generative models and language models becoming very popular. And I do love to sort of ask this question to these days whenever people are coming here, is that and then for you I think it's very core thing to it. I mean, I've had people here who have talked about this thing, and many people have said that okay, we are looking at adding it to our support, or that maybe now marketing graphics we're starting. It's like sort of peripheral things. For you, it's fairly core. So I mean, would love to know like what does it sort of looking at the future in terms of it powering like core products like yours, as well as like does it augment the workflow of, let's say, your engineers or people in a company? Does it replace people? What are your thoughts on where this is going right now?
Right. Anshuman, you want to take that first?
I think because you are right now pushing this first, maybe you go first.
Because I think you have
probably additional question for Anshuman on like in terms of career prospects for people as well. I'll probably augment that question, but yeah, maybe you can start.
So first of all, I think I feel like this is very slippery ground, because like the technology is moving so fast that whatever you say, quoted after 5 years, I'll look like a big fool. Very, very high chance of that happening.
But that's fair enough.
In the space that we are in, so I think let me break up your question into 2-3 parts. So first of all, we are more in the productivity space,
right?
Not in like displacing human space, right? So we are like trying to make human beings more efficient at what they do, right? So for us, it's it's a very easy win. We are not displacing anybody. We are trying to make the people who are already doing all this kind of support and all this stuff, they just make them more efficient. And yes, the hope is that maybe you don't need as many people, right?
Of course,
right. There are some interesting, I think, side effects beyond efficiency, which are maybe not obvious. So let me just mention. So let me give you an example, right? So we are a small company and we already have quite a few customers. Our customer Slack rooms are buzzing all the time. But maybe we don't need as many people. Maybe even I as a founder can support a lot more customers. Right? Why? Because the information is always at my fingertips because of these tools, right? So I have all the documentation indexed, all the Slack rooms indexed. I have the AI, the generative AI is amazing, because I can tell you that, being offered an answer as opposed to a search result, huge difference in this context, right? So the Gen AI stuff is really helping me. So I think it's not just reducing people, but it's also enabling people, for example, in my case, to be closer to my customers, because I can afford to respond to them because of these tools that I could not previously, because I can't keep up. We are churning out software every day. I can't keep up with the documentation, with the features, but this tool is assisting me. It's telling me where we are exactly, what are the nuances, and so on.
So one probably a rider question on top of that is using these tools for a bunch of purposes that I have also seen is like, just trying out something like Perplexity instead of Google, kind of very consumer search oriented things, but also like trying to plug it into my whole Obsidian diary, and then trying to ask some questions to that kind of a thing. And also like I was trying to build some plugins for my editor, like it will just I downloaded the whole Android developer docs, and so that the autocomplete, something like more fine-tuned Google Copilot in a sense, just for specific files and all. One issue that I feel a little bit is that, like you were saying, this is obviously better than search, right? You go and Stack Overflow a search and you find an answer and then you try to do it. Versus this, obviously, it can just inject the line there if you have a very good integration, but even if you have a bad integration, at least you can ask how to do this and you will have something that you can copy paste directly. But when there is incompleteness and when there is absence of information or when there is wrong information, the answer is not formatted like that, right? It's a very...
You're talking about the hallucination stuff.
Yeah, sometimes hallucinations, and sometimes, it's just a deflection to something else. You ask some question, but the answer is fairly different. For example, like let's say I ask that, I want to transform this image from PNG to JPG.
Right.
But the answer also has a resize added.
Right.
right? Those kind of things happen. It's and in a big bucket of hallucination, you can put this also.
Yeah.
I just wanted to transform the image, but it also resized it.
Sure. Yeah.
Because it has been trained on a lot of data where resize always happens, right? Stuff like that.
Right.
Now there, I feel a risk that I am able to catch these, but if I give it to somebody who's just starting off with Android development, I give this tool to them, they will end up with raising PRs with things which are wrong, and then I'm taking a very contrived example, for example, but still, like when you're doing a search, you hit a dead end, you have hit a dead end. You did not find answers. But here, sometimes you ask and there is no real answer, and it's you get a wrong answer. So that's, I think, a thing that needs to be sort of fixed for this to really scale, where it will 100% be used all the times, right?
So first of all, I think because we provide these tools as a service, we have tried to tackle the hallucination problem. So I think one of the challenges is that an average person going to Perplexity and just running a query, I don't know how much, to what extent Perplexity may also have, obviously would have done some of these things. But we kind of have like various stages in the pipeline. So we would load the search results, feed it, the prompt itself, the first level prompt is also fairly thoughtfully designed and has gone through our iterations. Then we have a verifier. Okay. So we actually take the answer and we kind of like, just like, you, like if I write an answer, you can check my answer. So exactly like that, we have another agent that sort of verifies the answer and provides another, filter so that some of the low quality answers get weeded out. So, so part of the answer, I think, is technological. Right. I think one of the things that we have to remember with AI, which was a very difficult, not a difficult, but like a fundamental learning lesson for me as we went about building this company, is that if you introduce AI in use cases where it is directly competing one-on-one with a human being, right? So this is your example, right? That I have a programmer who can write code, or I have an AI that can write code, more or less, right? Now, the programmer is, let's say they're both trying to, the programmer is a JavaScript programmer, he's a good JavaScript programmer, and the AI is, this is not a very good fit. And I'll tell you why. So what we tried to do, one of the first problems I tried to solve in this whole Slack thing was, which failed. So I'm going to talk about a project that utterly failed to demonstrate, the problem here. we tried to use AI models to find boundaries in chat rooms, because like what happens is people they keep typing, right? And so what you see is a wave of messages, but actually it is composed of a series of discrete conversations.
Correct.
And that is very important if you are trying to build a conversation monitoring tool. You need to find these boundaries, because
the topic has changed now.
You cannot have like a monitoring 1,000 things. You can say that, look, last one day you had 10 discrete conversations, and this is the status of those conversations. So we tried to solve this problem, right? We utterly failed, and I don't think AI can solve it, because what happens is, no matter what we do, there are errors. Our boundary will say that this conversation ended here and the next one started here. We'll get it wrong once in a while, right? A human being is always superior at detecting that boundary than the AI system. And the moment the AI does bad, just like the sentiment you are expressing, the human being says, what is this nonsense? Stop it.
Yeah.
So we had to stop it. Now, the rules, the way we solve the boundary detection, the rules and the heuristics we use are very, very precise. We do some of this, but almost 100%, right? I would give you another example of a company that is amazing at this, Grammarly. So we all probably have Grammarly running on our computers, right? And it keeps doing some suggestion, but you have not turned it off. And I have also not turned it off, because it is very, very accurate.
Yeah.
If it was even slightly inaccurate,
if it gets irritating, then you do
turn it off.
I used to turn it off actually earlier, and it has definitely improved.
It has improved.
So
right?
I used to keep it on for smaller text boxes, but when I'm writing long form, I would turn it off because it would get irritating.
I think one of the things that people in the AI, like people who are new to the AI space, I think this is maybe a 6 months to 12-month journey sort of education. They don't realize why FSD, the Tesla FSD, has failed. It has failed because of exactly this reason. That you are competing with a human being, and whenever the FSD is at fault, it doesn't matter what the aggregate statistics. Aggregate statistics might say that the FSD is actually more reliable than the human. But the moment it fails and the human being finds it obvious that why did you run into that truck right in front of you? He's like, I can't use this. This is obvious. So you cannot compete with a human one-on-one, right?
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that AI is not useful. So for example,
makes sense.
Now you shift to saying that let me try to do things that a human cannot do. right? So I give you the example, right? So I am a founder CEO trying to do a whole bunch of support, but I can't keep up with every feature my team cranks out. It's in my documentation, right? Now this system brings my documentation to me at the time I need it in a very, very easy to consume format, right? To me, that is something I cannot do. So even if it gets it wrong 10% of the time, I'm okay with it, right? I'm smart enough to at least figure that out. Yeah, I have to be a little bit smart to figure out that this 10% is the wrong, that there is something fishy out here. That much I have to be able to figure out. But it is adding a huge amount of value to me, right? Let's take more examples.
And capacity increase being a very clear use case.
Even more sweet spot is whenever AI does something across a lot of data, right? So yeah, I cannot detect the conversation boundary in a Slack chat room and compete with a human. But if you said, hey, there are like 500 channels, and maybe you guys also have a lot of channels with your students, right? Go scan those 500 channels for the last 3 months. Do some analysis. Tell me the 10 students who are most unhappy with my service, right? Who cares if it's a 10 to 20% mistake, 30% mistake it makes? Do you care? You don't care because you can never do it yourself. So for you, it's a huge gain in like your capabilities.
Yeah, when it's a very pure quantity over quality game, those kind of things, it's
so I think
clear when you
so
have.
I think we have to have the nuance that am I competing with a human or am I enabling the human to do something that they just can't do themselves?
I think like older fields in machine learning have had that journey because I feel like object detection was like a very new thing. Like there's obviously like bounded boxes and all the basic stuff. You box a car and say that it is a house or stuff like that sometimes would happen. But I think over time what's like very consumer grade systems, what they do is that they have the confidence factor thing. And if the confidence factor is too low, it will not detect that object.
Right.
Rather than like pointing out things which with a 60% confidence, it will simply not do it. So like a consumer grade version of it would be like your Google Photos where you can search by object types and you will find your old photos. You don't find all the photos, like if you search for...
It's okay. Right?
But you still get a good bulk of the photos and you're fine. But if it is wrong, then you would start not using it because like, I search for such for a car and I get something else, not a point. It makes sense.
You have...
About the...
on the talent piece, right? I mean, look, same thing, right? Like we don't know how the world is going to evolve, and it is very possible that 10 years down the line, whatever I'm saying will sound very stupid.
But our 640K moment.
I think just for a couple of days back, the Devin dropped that you can write code kind of things.
No, but I still feel because of exactly what you were discussing, it is very possible that in all critical applications of AI, where the accuracy of the response matters, there it is always going to be a human assisted thing. I mean, for example, I feel that even with coding, you're not going to have like a company which is only running on completely AI driven coding. AI is writing the code, reviewing the code and pushing the code. You still have somebody assisting it and telling it what to build and how to build, and then verifying, and then finally sending out a PR request, and then maybe other people verifying, and then finally it going to production. So what that means is that there are two competing forces that I foresee in the future. One is because a single engineer will be able to do a lot more using AI, the need for the number of engineers to actually execute a task as compared to today will significantly reduce.
Right.
So the same job might be done by 10 engineers today, it might be done by, let's say, 2 engineers in the future. However, at the same time, the other competing force is that because today with AI, you can solve a much wider range of problems. Earlier, you could only solve a deterministic problem.
Right.
Like where you can write your logic and then finally it works. Now you can solve a much wider range of problem. So the number of problems or the number of companies that would get created in this space would also increase.
Right.
So there is this one part which is pulling more people into tech, saying that, hey, there are so many more problems to be solved. And there's this other part which is actually reducing the need for a lot of software engineers because of one person being able to do more. My thesis is that one, I mean, look, overall there is going to be need for tech because everything is moving in that direction. Software will continue to eat the world, and you will need high quality of engineers all across, which is very unfortunate because in a way the divide between the rich and the poor is going to become even larger. If you are a good engineer, then there is going to be a space here for a lot of people, and all of those jobs are going to be, because they're creating so much impact, they're creating so much value, they're going to be decently paying jobs, high paying jobs. I feel that the large layer of low paid software engineering jobs that exist today, which is very repetitive, probably isn't very creative, that might go away with time.
Right. Probably like a second level question on that, which I recently had a conversation on Twitter with somebody. It's an interesting line of thought is that probably, speaking in very crude terms, and an AI kind of Devin kind of thing can operate at a SD1 level of capability, but not at an SD2 level of capability. But you do become an SD2 by grinding as an SD1 for a couple of years. And if you're saying that the need for what an entry-level software engineer does is vanishing, then how will the systems produce the senior software engineers?
Yeah.
What are the thoughts on that?
Well, that's a great question. I've been also thinking about this.
because I mean, I was having the thread of conversation. Somebody mentioned that it's similar thing they have seen in the database world, where the ORMs and everything. It's becoming harder to find people who are good with.
Yeah. So I mean, let me actually go back in our history. I've been working for a long time. I can make the exact same argument about current programmers versus what we learned when we came out of college. Right, so I was a C and Linux programmer when I graduated. Right, there was not even C++, and we used to write everything from scratch. Right, socket programming, like for us, it was socket didn't mean WebSocket. It meant like whatever STDIO dot whatever, right, something like that. Right, and that transition of the SD1 of that era is irrelevant has already happened. Right, vast majority of the people today, even as graduates, what they are doing is amazingly more than what we used to do when we graduated. Right? They are building end-to-end applications. They're like CSS, JavaScript, app server, database schema, host in the cloud. Like, man, like that stuff they're doing is just amazing, right? And they've never done the stuff that I did, which is like, write some assembly code by hand and write like really, really low level network code, which actually is inside some of these systems that they are using, right? They never had to do it. But it doesn't seem to matter. It's fine.
Yeah, I mean, there's a very small need of that now, and that much need is fulfilled by the people who are interested in that.
The experts. Right? So maybe we are just like overthinking this, right? Maybe, you just sort of leapfrog to the next level, right? And maybe, for example, I think maybe the next generation software engineer should be more product and design oriented. Because a lot of the coding and at least the base level. I'm not saying that we'll code the entire application, but there is so much productivity gain coming out of the time where your time used to go, right? Which is like raw, like hundreds of lines of code. A lot of that is much faster. And where should your time go? Well, you should probably pull in more stuff, right, into your, just like that C guy writing socket program, you started doing all this stuff. Now maybe you should do more. Maybe you should be a designer also. You should think product also. You should think like product analytics also, right? Like all the things that maybe are today outside of the ambit of a classic sort of a SD, at least when they start. So yeah.
I think that's great parting thoughts. Anshuman, anything to add on that? Like, like in this changing world, and I, like Joydeep has said, we can be horribly long, but still looking at the things that are changing, sort of advice of people who are getting started with their careers in this, what kind of things they should focus on?
I think fundamentals are evergreen. I mean, if you're very, very good with engineering fundamentals, they never go away. They were relevant back then, they're relevant even today. So just focus on fundamentals. I believe like if your fundamentals are very solid, learning new things as things evolve becomes easier. If I don't know fundamentals, then I mean, if I'm just doing patchwork, like just memorizing libraries, I mean, then it's just going to be very, very difficult, no matter how the world evolves. So just solid fundamentals. That's it.
Right. And then I think that's also an additional good piece of things. I think a lot of times engineers early on in their career, they don't think about like what you're doing really is actually taking a business problem or a product problem and you have to solve it. How would you solve it does not really matter. So like starting to evolve into that thinking on the overall product.
Yeah, unfortunately, they both have to be there. Like what has not changed in 30 years is that the DSA algorithms we are doing are still the same.
Yeah.
So I think that point about fundamentals is just supremely important. I think because one of the other things that you are at least today, where the AI systems, I think, in my opinion, kind of seem to be missing is like a world model. What Jan LeCun says, again and again, he says that they don't have the world model in their head. So I think unless you understand the fundamentals and how the world works at a slightly higher level, where your understanding of that is much superior to these LLM engines, which are mostly like text regurgitating engines, right? You have to add that value. Otherwise, if you're just like, if you are another user of some library and the AI is also using the library,
then
you will probably lose. That's not a good fight.
And the heart of it is like having your strong fundamentals, being able to truly understand the problem that you're solving.
Yeah.
The tools that you use in the middle will get compressed over time.
So, for example, one of the values that another good way of looking at this is that people who have worked for a long time, in some ways, we are also prompt engineers, right? So we don't. For many years, I've been a manager for many years now. And I've been prompting my employees, right? Not AI, but I've been prompting my employees, right? So then what am I doing, right? So I'm definitely, I have some value add I'm doing, right? Yeah. So what is it that where I'm adding value, right? So the people who are graduating today should maybe learn from people like us that this guy is manager for 10 years. What is it he does? What is the value he's adding? I need to add those value. Right? Because I'm going to have those AI reports very quickly. I don't have to wait for 30 years like this guy, right? And the way we add value is the understanding of fundamentals. So making sure, for example, that systems that we build are reliable, scalable, and so on. And that's a very deep understanding. It's not like writing code. We understand user experience, right? Yeah. So we're always thinking about, where's the friction? What are we trying to optimize for? And those kind of things, right? So I think you just need to step one step above, right? Yeah. And take a look at what managers do today. Take decisions. It's a very hard one, right? Yeah, that's the hardest thing. I think all of you probably go through these things, right? Yeah.
But I also see from what Anshuman was saying about the two competing forces, mapping that to like even the existence of something like ClearFeed. It's also possible because those opportunities open up.
Yes.
Without these AI tools, this is not a domain somebody would have chased.
I want to very strongly echo that. I had a very similar discussion again also on Twitter. Somebody asked, because for human beings, one of the things that happens is we always think the world is a zero-sum game. It's very natural for us that the world will shrink because we can. What shrinks is very easy to see. What will expand is not easy to see. And actually, it's the people who are able to spot what will expand. They always do. Comparatively better than the people who always think that this everything will shrink, right? So one of the things that we have seen for many years is that in a company, the IT budget is a proportion. It typically doesn't change. So like if you are earning let's say $100 in revenue, likely you will spend $10 in IT budget, right? And through many waves and waves of technology transitions from mainframes to computers to clouds to big data to whatever, right? And it doesn't seem to change, right? So the takeaway there is then, okay, so then, if I need less people to build the same apps that I used to build before, so it doesn't cost as much, then what am I going to do with the money that's left over? Because most likely, if you look at prior evidence, IT budget will not change, right? So what will happen is exactly what Anshuman said, which is that all the things that could not be built before because they were too expensive, right? Because you couldn't, it was just too expensive, personalized. I think AI is going to make everything very personalized.
Yeah, I'm already seeing in the content space people talking about things just like the way older recommendation models, like your typical, CNN-based models, they work, that you still do it for a large number of people. You do what you call is, I think, they call palettes. You generate a bunch of palettes and you map people to lots of palettes. But suddenly now people are saying, oh, there is a possibility we can personalize for every user.
Yes.
Every user possibility was just not possible.
Yes, I used to work in recommendations. This was always the thing that, how can I do a per user model? I can't.
Yeah. Right. But now people are saying, how about we generate it on the edge and per user?
So I have one takeaway, which is that as apps become easier to build, what will happen is that all the things that you could not automate before, because you could not afford to build a specialized enough app to solve a particular workflow or a particular use case, because it's not ROI is not there.
Yeah.
If you can build it cheaply, ROI is there.
Yeah.
Right. So we'll just end up building a lot more apps. Is one thesis I have.
Right.
Yeah. Same here. And I believe like not just a lot more apps, but even with hardware, there are going to be a lot more things that we'll be able to do.
Yeah.
That we possibly couldn't have done before, right? So
yeah, I think purpose-built hardware, the biggest challenge to that is that you won't easily have the purpose-built software to go with it earlier all the time, because like general purpose things are easier more, but then they are not that efficient on specific purposes.
Right.
So and there was this Tesla demo on that cloth folding robot kind of thing. Like in reality, if at scale cloth folding robots will not be a humanoid robot folding clothes, it will probably be a purpose-built robot which is for folding clothes. But then like it's very costly today if somebody has to handwrite the software
for that fun thing.
Or cloth folding. But then if it becomes cheaper, then obviously that becomes possible. I think great note to conclude on that. These two competing forces, and once you understand that, probably people can also look at the possible opportunities out there. Thanks, Joydeep, for the time spent. It was a great conversation, and thanks Anshuman for sitting in as well. We had a lot of great discussion about the Facebook era as well. So thank you.
Cool. Thanks a lot.
thank you, Jad. Thank you.